All right, let's get right into it. Something huge is happening right now in 2026. A massive battle is underway over the 80-year-old system that has pretty much shaped the world as we know it. And honestly, the outcome is going to define the future for all of us.
And look, this isn't just some exaggeration. This is a direct quote, a stark warning from the 2026 Munich Security Conference. That's, the leading global forum on this stuff. The report says point blank that the very foundation of our international system might be getting dismantled as we speak. That really sets the stage for a monumental clash of ideas.
So that naturally leads us to the big question we're going to unpack here. What in the world is this post-war order that you keep hearing about? And maybe more importantly, why is there such a powerful push right now to just tear it all down?
To really get what's going on, we have to go to the absolute epicenter of this whole thing, the Munich Security Conference, back in February 2026. This is where decades of tension that were kind of bubbling under the surface just exploded out into the open. It was right there that the U.S. administration, under President Trump, made its goal totally, unmistakably clear. We're not talking about reforms or little tweaks here. The stated mission was to actively destroy the global systems of trade and security, the very systems that were put in place after the Second World War. Okay, so before we jump back into that showdown in Munich, let's just take a quick step back. It's important to get a clear picture of what this order actually is. What is it that's at risk of being completely erased? At its heart, the post-war international order was really a huge idea put into practice. The thinking, which was pushed by the U.S. and its allies, was pretty simple. If we want to prevent another horrible world war, nations need to build a system based on cooperation and shared values, not just on who has the biggest army. And this whole system was really built on three main pillars. The first was a belief in representative democracy. The second was this idea of economic interdependence, the theory that if countries trade a lot with each other, they're way less likely to go to war. And third, you needed to create international organizations, places where countries could go to work out their problems peacefully.
And for decades, this system actually did its main job pretty well. It prevented another massive global war. But over time, deep cracks started to show up in the foundation. And interestingly, they didn't come from outside threats. They came from pressures building up right inside the United States itself. This timeline really lays out how it all happened. In 1991, the Cold War ends, and that common enemy that had kind of held American politics together, well, it was gone. At the exact same time, a huge economic shift was getting started. And by 2016, all the economic anxiety from that shift helped fuel a political movement that went directly against that old order. Now, get this number, $50 trillion. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. That's the estimated amount of wealth that got redistributed from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1% between 1975 and 2020. That created an absolutely enormous amount of economic pressure on the American middle class. But here's where the story takes a turn. Instead of blaming economic policy, a really powerful political story started to take hold. It argued that the real problem wasn't this massive wealth inequality. No, the problem was cultural changes, and it was racial minorities, women, and immigrants asking the government for support. And that narrative was incredibly successful at turning economic anger into a cultural war. So, okay, let's flash forward again to that 2026 Munich conference, because this is where that domestic cultural fight in America suddenly went global. You had two completely different visions for the future of the entire world colliding right there, head on. So on one side, you have the U.S. administration. Secretary of State Marco Rubio spelled it out. The biggest threat to the world wasn't war, it wasn't an economic collapse, it was a cultural threat. He argued that mass migration was a threat to the very existence of what he called Western civilization. And the European response? Wow. It was immediate. And it was blunt. The EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, just completely rejected that idea. She argued that Europe is absolutely not facing civilizational erasure, and that its values of cooperation and openness are a strength that other countries actually want to be a part of. So the key takeaway here is that this isn't just about one or two issues. It's a clash on pretty much everything. You can see the breakdown right here. The U.S. administration's vision rejects global trade, rejects international groups, rejects climate action, all in the name of dominance.
Meanwhile, the EU is doubling down on all of it: free trade, international agreements, climate action, and a world built on partnership.
And this gets to the absolute heart of it, doesn't it? We're looking at two completely different diagnoses for why we're in this mess. One narrative says the problem is cultural. It's caused by migration and losing so-called Western civilization. And the fix is to go back to traditional hierarchies. But the other narrative says no, the problem is class-based. It's caused by massive wealth inequality, and the solution is a foreign policy that actually works for working people.
So this massive disagreement between these old allies has basically created a vacuum. And into that empty space, a third idea, a third vision for America's role in the world is now being put forward. This alternative vision, pushed by people like Representatives Ocasio-Cortez and Crow, it really tries to carve out a third path. The idea is to build a foreign policy that actually benefits the working class. It rejects blaming people for cultural reasons on one side, but it also rejects the constant military interventions of the past on the other. The focus here is all about partnerships that are fair and that create shared prosperity. And you know, this quote from Representative Jason Crow really just nails it. It's about getting away from a foreign policy run by elites and moving toward one that's based on the real lives of everyday people, one that delivers real benefits to working folks, not just at home, but all over the world. So, at the end of the day, this is where we are. We are at a true crossroads. That 80-year-old system is being challenged, and there are two very different futures being offered up. One is a world that looks a lot like the past, a world of great power competition, of dominance, of building cultural walls. The other is a reimagined vision of global cooperation, but one that's built on a totally new foundation of fairness for working people. And the huge looming question for all of us is, which path will be chosen?